Now, in this section, we'll be dealing with the identity of the dead person. The personal identification is the mainstay for any forensic expert who is dealing with any live or even the dead cases. But in this section, it is specific to the dead persons. How do we establish identity of a person, even in mass disasters? When we are dealing with mass disasters, any airplane crash or any bomb blast, there are a lot of fragments that are found at that crime scene, and we have to identify the identity of all of them. Just to hand them over to their relatives, even if it is of significance how many people were present over there, and if a certain person was present over there or not at the crime scene. So all of these are very important and they're of high significance. We have to establish identities, even in isolated cases and even in mass disasters. In this section, we'll be dealing with why is it important to identify the identity of a person, of a specific person, and the identity. Basically, what is the identity? Identity is basically the sex of the person, the age of the person, the name of the person, where the racial belonging to the person, the ancestral belonging of a person. All of these are discussed in this section. Now, the characteristics useful to identify these remains are very important. There are specific peculiar factors that we are going to follow, and they are going to lead us towards the identity of the specified person. So this is a very nice example. This was Will West, and he was a prisoner. And he had got his own number of the prison in US in the Penitentiary at Leavenworth. And at the same time, there was another prisoner, and he had almost the same peculiar facial features that he had, and his name was William West. Even there was a similarity in the names of the people, and they were basically facial characteristics were same, and nobody could identify them separately. They didn't have any paternal or maternal acquisitions, and basically they belonged to different families, and there was no basically linked found between them. So these things can happen, and we have to identify the people differently. There are certain different characteristics that are peculiar to certain persons. Even on first glance, if they appear similar, there are certain characteristics that are there to identify them, or they are there to distinguish them from each other. So the ethical and the humanitarian need. So why is it basically important for us to identify different people? It has its own ethical values, of course, and to establish the fact of the death for official, statistical, and legal purposes. So this is also very important. And to record, identify for administrative and ceremonial purposes even. He has to obtain a certain type of job, he has to marry, all these ceremonial purposes, these administrative purposes. We have to identify his sex, his age. All these are in all of these respects. In respect of burial, of cremation, all of these has to be identified. Now, to discharge the legal claims and obligations in relation to property, estates, and debts. So, these legal matters have to be kept in mind, and we have to identify a particular person who was involved in a certain case. To prove claims for life insurances, contracts, survival pensions, and other financial matters. So, all of these are also important. In cases of insurances and the survivor pensions, he has to get the money, he has to get the benefits for that. So we have to identify the particular person in detail over here. To allow the legal investigations, inquests, and other tribunals. This is also a very important aspect on why do we identify, why is it so important to identify a certain person. Now, to facilitate the police inquiries into the overtly criminal or the suspicious deaths, that is also one of the causes why is it important to identify a certain person. Now, identification from the anatomical and the medical features comprises of the establishment of certain broad groupings such as sex, stature, ancestry, and age. The comparison of the remains with the ante-mortem information and records from those thought to be the victims. So basically, they are compared with each other, and they provide a proof toward being a victim or the guilty. Now, the establishment of identity may be required upon intact, fresh corpses, the dead bodies, of course, and the decomposed bodies as well. So, we can have our hands, the dead is basically divided into a skeletonized body and a fresh body, on the other hand. We can lay our hands on all of these, and through these, basically in the fresher bodies, their physical features, their physical maintained bodies, and the facial features, they are the mainstay for the identification to their relatives. And on the decomposed corpses, on the other hand, we have to deal with the other aspects. For example, the DNA, and all of these come in handy when we are identifying the dead bodies of any decomposed corpses. And then we can have skeletalized remains. In those, even we can have a lot of basically DNA material, the fingerprinting, all of this. Whatever is in our hand, we are basically going to investigate that, and we are going to basically establish the perfect identity for that corpse. Now, characteristics useful in identifying the body. It can be, first of all, if it is not, if it is a fresher body, the facial appearance. The facial appearance is the mainstay over here whenever we are discussing that. But there can be a lot of basically the decomposition stages. They can be going on to that. Even if there are soft parts are intact, the putrefactive gases can basically disfigure the facial features a lot, and the personal identity of that person cannot be established very easily in that case. Moving on to the eye color. Now, the eye color, it is not very appropriate to basically establish the identity of a person through the eye color, because after that, basically, there is certain opacity of the sclera and the cornea, and the eye color goes, a lot of haziness is there, and so we cannot establish a particular eye color in the dead body, and that should not be the sole thing for the identification of the person. The skin pigmentation, again, if we have fresher bodies, there can be burnt bodies. In that cases, the body is so much charred that the skin pigmentation cannot be the sole cause for the identification of the person. Post-mortem lividity can contribute towards the cherry red discoloration or certain types of discolorations. Then in cyanide poisoning, for example, there is a bluish discoloration to the body. So all of these basically alter the identification and basically they conceal the identification of the person. Now, moving on towards the hair color. Now, the hair color, even that is not the mainstay towards the identification. But all of these, if they are intact, they basically contribute towards your identification at some point in time. The hair structure is very important, and the tattoos. Now, the tattoos, why is it important? Basically, the type of ethnic group. There were certain tattoos that basically stood for certain signs of that ethnic group, for that racial group, and that can basically lead to the identification of a person. But with the passage of time, basically, it's been quite habitual. The tattoo formation is quite habitual these days. And that is basically going to hinder the process of identification of certain tattoos and basically linking them to certain racial phenomena. So tattoo, basically, it is basically a phenomena in which basically a color is basically put on into the dermis of the skin. And even if it is dismembered and it is not present at that side, the lymph nodes can carry the pigment of the tattoo. So that is basically identifiable that this person has a tattoo or not, had a tattoo or not while he was living. Then the finger, the palm, and the foot and the lip prints. Now, certain people, this is very distinguishable. The palm prints, the foot, the fingerprints, and the lip prints. Everybody has different of all of these, and they are very peculiar to a certain person. Now, identifying scars. Scars can be any surgical scars even. The relatives can lead to the formation of these surgical scars, and they can give the history, what surgeries he had while he was living. And basically, there should be a comparative stage to it. And they can be any scars for the trauma. that are quite evident from the photographs that are provided by the relatives, that he had the scar on whatever the trauma he had during life. Now, the occupational stigmata. So the occupational stigmata, certain occupations are basically stigmatized to certain type of postures, to certain type of things that they acquire through their occupation. So that can lead to the identification of a person as well. The stature of the intact body is very important, the height, the weight, but that is basically, there are certain calculation formulas that we'll be dealing on in the certain particular sections. How is the stature of the person calculated? The determination of the sex in the non-skeletonized body is very important as well. And the age and the ancestry. We have to link the person to his ancestry as well. So in this section, basically, we dealt with the importance of personal identification and why is it important basically to identify a person. This is dealt in with this section. That was the end to this section. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.